So let's look at this pie here that represents a fraction. So we look at this pie, we see that it is carved into 8 slices, and we have 2 of the 8 shaded. So this represents the fraction 2/8. But if we come down here and we look at this fraction, or look at this pie has 4 parts. It's cut into fourths, and it has 1 of the fourths shaded, and so this gives us the fraction 1/4. But if we look at these 2 pies, you should hopefully see something very similar, that this 2/8, these 2 portions of this 8 is essentially equivalent to this 1 portion of the fourth. All right, so this is when we talk about equivalent fractions. And so the first thing we can think about is simplifying fractions. So if we start looking at this 2/8, we can notice that there is something that is common between 2 and 8, and that is a common factor. So we previously talked about common factors. So we think about the factors of 2. The factors of 2 are 1 and 2. We think about the factors of 8. The factors of 8 are 1, 2, 4, and 8. And so our common factor between 2 and 8 is going to be 2. So there's a common factor between 2 and 8. So that allows us to do something called simplifying the fraction. Anytime there's a common factor between your numerator and your denominator, you can divide both the numerator and the denominator by that common factor to simplify the fraction. So in this case, our common factor is 2. So I'm going to do something called as above, so below. I'm going to divide the numerator above and the denominator below by the common factor. The common factor is 2. And if I do that, 2 divided by 2 is 1. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So you see I end up with this simplified version of the fraction here. All right? So anytime I have a numerator and denominator that have a common factor, I can divide that factor out to get the fraction in simplest form. Likewise, this pie over here, we have 4/8. This represents 4/8. We can look at 4 and 8, and we know that there is a common factor between 4 and 8, and the greatest of those common factors is going to be 4. 2 is also a common factor, but the greatest common factor is going to be 4, right? The factors of 4 are 1, 2, and 4. The factors of 8 are 1, 2, 4, and 8. So I'll list that out. So here, the factors of 4 are 1, 2, and 4. Again, factors here, these are the numbers that we can multiply together to get 4. So 1 times 4 or 2 times 2. And then the factors of 8 are 1, 2, 4, and 8. So again, what we can multiply to get 8, we can do 1 times 8, or we can do 2 times 4. All right? The greatest of these common factors is 4. So common factors, 1 of course is trivial, but we also have 2 and 4. The greatest of the common factors is 4. So if we divide the numerator and the denominator by the greatest common factor, we will get the fraction in simplest form. Again, as above, so below. If I divide the numerator by 4, I have to also divide the denominator by 4. So 4 divided by 4 is 1, and 8 divided by 4 is 2. So this gives us our equivalent fraction of 1/2. All right, so let's look at some other examples of simplifying fractions. Simplifying fractions gives us an equivalent fraction, right, in simplest form. So let's look at the improper fraction, 26/12. All right, for 26/12, what we want to do is we want to see if we can find the greatest common factor between 26 and 12. It doesn't have to be the greatest common factor, but finding the greatest common factor saves us a little bit of work. So if we want to find the greatest common factor, we can do factor trees. 26 is going to be 2 times 13, and 12 is going to be 3 times 4. 4 is 2 times 2. All right, so I can say that 26 is equal to 2 times 13, and 12 is equal to 2 times 2 times 3. And the only pair of common factors we have are 2. So therefore, our greatest common factor here is 2. So I divide by that greatest common factor. So I'm going to divide both my numerator and my denominator by 2, and that gives me 13/6. All right, and so that is the simplified version of this particular fraction. If we want to find, let's say, an equivalent fraction, so let's say I have the fraction, let's say I have, no, let's say I have, yeah, that's fine. Let's say I have 36/54. And I want to find an equivalent fraction that has a denominator of 6. All right, well, how would I do that? So again, remember, the relationship between any equivalent fractions is a common factor, right? So to get from 26/12 to 13/6, we divided by a common factor. In this case, to go from a denominator of 54ths to 6 means we are, again, dividing by a factor. So we have to say, what is the factor pair that will give us 6 from 54? So basically, I'm saying what divided by 54 divided by what is equal to 6? And that's 9, because we know that 9 times 6 is 54. So if we did 54 divided by 9, that would give us 6. So 9 is therefore our common factor. So we can also divide 36 by 9 to get our final answer here, which is 4. So this is not in simplest form. 4/6 is not in simplest form because 9 is not the greatest common factor between 54 and 36, but it is a common factor. So dividing by a common factor will give us an equivalent fraction. But if we divide by the greatest common factor, then we will get the fraction in simplest form. So we can again simplify 4/6 by noting that the common factor between 4 and 6 is going to be 2. So I'll divide both of these by 2. So 4 divided by 2 is 2, and 6 divided by 2 is 3. All right, so our answer in simplest terms here is going to be 2/3. That's how we simplify fractions, and that's how we find equivalent fractions. Oh, and let's do one more. Let's say, for example, I wanted to go larger. So let's say I have 2 over something, and I want to make an equivalent fraction of 8/36. All right, so I want to know what will give me that equivalent fraction. So here, the multiple that we're going to use is 4, because we know that 2 times 4 will give us 8. So therefore, we're going to divide 36 by that same 4 to get us back to 9, because if we do 9 times 4, we see that we'll get 36. So 2/9 is equal to 8/36. So that's how we can simplify fractions and find equivalent